Do you want a chair or a?
No, I'm going to probably pay. I get nervous.
Okay.
So I'm going to pay,
I'll
and
give
then
you
I
some
can look at
space.
everybody. It'll be fine. Actually, I'm very happy to be back here. It's become kind of a nice tradition to come back to Fond du Lac. And I'm sorry that Sylvia's not here, so I just want to acknowledge that Sylvia is with her family and for a memorial of her brother. So when she sees this video, I just wanted to know I'm saying hello to her as well. It's interesting to me that when I talked to Sylvia many months ago that this would be the topic that I suggested, not knowing what was going to be happening in our own country. So I just want to say it almost seems ironic that I'd be talking about listening at a time when we really need to listen to each other. But before I go into a big long thing, it would help me to know how many people don't know anything about what shamanism is, just so I can, okay, quite a few. Sylvia wanted me to tell my story, so I'm going to take 5 minutes to tell my story, which includes talking about what shamanism is. I'm hoping I can put that there. And then I want to talk about the topic. Shamanism is an anthropological term. It's used to describe a methodology of human healing, spiritual human healing, that has existed for up to 70,000 years. And it's existed in every culture around the world. And one of the things that's unique about this methodology is that they all do it in a similar way. They go into a trance, and they travel in places in their mind. They believe that they're sending their soul to places in the imaginary realm, in the invisible world, where they talk to the spirits. And they get direct spiritual information that they use for their own healing, for healing others, and providing guidance for their tribe. And probably right now we all need a lot of guidance about how we're going to get through this time. But that's kind of the general, unique, generic definition that's used for describing shamanism. Now, not everybody is called to this path. In most traditions, the calling is something that happens because of a near-death experience or because of surviving a profound illness. And in some cases, you apprentice. I have all three. So when I was born premature, a long time ago, back in the 40s, and I spent 6 weeks in an incubator. And probably because of that, it has something to do with the fact that I don't have much hearing. And because I don't have much hearing, I listen in a very different way, which is true in indigenous cultures. They don't listen the way we listen. They listen in so many different ways that I'm going to be talking about. But I think from the beginning, I was different. And when I was 1.5 years old, I had pneumonia, and I died. I was physically dead. I was revived in the hospital. And as the stories go in my family, I was different. Now different is interesting because we now have family reunions in my family. After many years of people not talking to each other, we've made peace. And we have, every 3 years, about 150 family members get together and we get along, which is a miracle in and of itself. But all of my older cousins will tell stories about what I was like when I was 2 years old. Everybody was frightened of me because I would respond to things they were thinking in their head, because when you don't hear this way, you hear another way. Maybe you've been walking down the street and you hear somebody's voice in your head and you turn around and there they are. Maybe you've had that happen. It's like a way that we unconsciously send to each other. Well, I would hear people that way and I would respond. And because I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, I would read the Indianapolis Star, that too, and they would look at this very bizarrely until I told them what was in the news. So they were pretty frightened. Now, when I was 5, I had a great aunt. Obviously, she's still my great aunt. And she knew something about me, and she happened to be what we called a dreaming woman. She was a shaman. And she would dream, and she was quite old, because my parents were quite old when they got married. And she taught me how to do dreaming the way shamans dream. So from age 5, she started teaching me these traditions from a Jewish perspective, because there was a women's healing tradition that was passed on for thousands of years. Very secret, but she carried that. So very early on, I was learning about listening in a different way. And when I was, it's a little bit interesting to hear about this biography, because I didn't really look at it, because actually it's been over 50 years now that I've been doing this. When I was 17, I just started reading a new book about Black Elk. If people know the famous Black Elk or Black Elk Speaks, there's a new book out now about him, which has been interesting. His son was my first Native American teacher. I met him when I was 17 years old. A young woman that I was infatuated with at that time was taking a class in Native American spirituality at Indiana University, the first class of its kind in the United States. And she said, "Oh, you should come." And I came, and he was doing a ceremony. And after the ceremony, he came up to me and he said, "You know all this stuff." But the truth is that from that point on, I started coming out more. So now it's 50 years later. And one of the things that's true about indigenous ways around the world is that when they talk about listening, they're listening to everything. They're listening to the wind. They're listening to the land. This place that we're in, it's talking to us all the time. The trees are talking to us all the time. But we don't take the time to slow down enough to listen to what they might be saying. Now, this has always been kind of a weird topic for people when you talk about places communicating and listening. Because the listening, you feel it as a vibration. The thoughts that come into your mind. And you wonder, why am I thinking that? And yet, if you start listening to that, you're not crazy. So though sometimes people worry that they might be crazy if they're hearing thoughts in their brain. Just like once I gave a talk in New York City about peacemaking, and this woman came up to me after the talk and said, "You know, I'm a psychiatric nurse, and I watched you listening to something, and it was scaring me." Right? So how do we tell the difference between, say, God's voice or caca? It's not always easy. They feel different. I can't describe that in words, but it feels different. But in that listening and that relationship, all these traditions have this belief that everything's connected, that we're in relationship with everything, that we're not separate, and that illness happens spiritually, physically, emotionally, when we become separate from ourselves, from each other. And here we are in a time where we're very separate. And actually one of the first radical political acts that you can do, just in my opinion, is to refuse to be separated. To refuse to make somebody else wrong, or bad, or evil. You can disagree with them, but there's a way in which you refuse to be separated. That's a pretty radical thing to do. It's not easy. Now, in my career, I've been in prisons and I've been in refugee camps. I've been in urban gang-infested areas. One of the things that's happened a lot in my life is that I've been in healing circles with people who were leaders of the KKK, members of the American Nazi parties of various sorts. And I thought to myself, from the very first time it ever happened, how in the heck did I, this Jewish guy, from a poor inner city neighborhood of Indianapolis, end up here? But it's because, I believe it's because God wanted it, or the Spirit, whatever word you want to use. And every time that's happened, it's been amazing. People, I remember the first time I was in federal prison, and what they like to do in prison is they like to play jokes on people. And so they had me meeting with a circle of 45 inmates for 3 hours. 44 were black and 1 white guy. All of them were in prison for murder. So at the end of my talk, because I was talking about trauma and what that does to the soul and how that injures our spirit and what does that mean when we feel empty and when we feel wounded and how do we heal that, very much the way shamans talk about it. And this man came up to me at the end, the 1 white guy, and I can't use the words he used because we're in a spiritual community, but they all started with F, so you can go there if you want to. But he was saying, I can't believe I'm with an F, blah, 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 meaning a Jew, let alone somebody who's a blah, 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 meaning somebody who's practicing indigenous healing. And then, after ranting and raving for about 10 minutes, he asked me to do healing for him. He was the former head of the Ku Clan. He had grown up filled with hate, and hate is a cancer. It's a spiritual cancer. It eats away at us. And when I feel so much pain, because I've been wounded, because he was on the receiving end of tremendous amount of violence growing up, when we have all that violence, spiritually, indigenous people believe that we're trying to give that violence away to someone else. Because it's so painful in me, I'm going to give it to somebody. Well, that phenomena pervades our world right now, in truth. Up until about 2 weeks ago, I was overseas. I was in the Middle East, working with refugees in the Middle East. And then I was in Germany, working with refugees in Germany, because the Germans have created an amazing system, very German. It doesn't work, but it's very German. Very organized, very orderly. 388 pages on how we will integrate 1 million refugees. Makes no sense, but it is what it is. But the situation with the refugees in Europe has created a tremendous amount of reactivity in Europe. So when I was walking in Germany, I had the great experience of having people come up to me and harass me and assault me because they thought I was a Syrian refugee. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And so I just listened to them and I smiled, and I listened and I smiled. And finally, I just said to them, you know, I'm not a Syrian refugee. I said that in German, the little bit that I know. They were like, but I was able to have a dialogue because they could speak English. it was interesting how much fear and anger they had. They fear that they're going to lose something that they don't have. When I was in Poland, because I also went to Poland, my granddaughters, I have 2 little granddaughters, they live in southern Poland. When I was there in the summer, visiting, all the parents were telling their children to stay away from me because they were identifying me as a Jewish man. So they were telling their children about the old blood libel myth of the past. Meaning the idea that Jews kill babies for their blood and make bread out of them. That's the old things that used to be said. And I'm talking about this not because but primarily because that's what we have going on here. There's been so much verbal vitriol in the recent campaign that it's kind of uncorked all this stuff that's laying in the soil, it's in the land, it's in the people, it's in the trees and the rocks. They all remember all this stuff, and it's waiting to be healed. Well, so when I was in Poland in the summer, I just kept playing with my grandchildren, and the people kept watching me playing with my grandchildren, and all the other children wanted to come play with me and my grandchildren. And after 4 or 5 days, the parents started to realize that I wasn't killing babies for blood or anything else. I was actually an okay human being. We got through it. I'm not saying that's easy. I'm just saying we got through it. And after the end of my travels, I went to Poland just recently, where once again, on the streets, I was attacked. Both as a Syrian refugee. There are no Syrian refugees in Poland, because Poland voted in a right-wing government months ago. And then I got attacked for being a Jew, both in the same day, walking in the streets of Krakow. And I'm saying this because this is not a United States phenomenon. This is a world phenomenon. We're reacting to what's happening in the world. And what's happening in the world is true kind of universally. The world doesn't work for everybody. It works for some people, but it doesn't work for most. Everybody's struggling in some way. Global warming is everywhere. People are struggling to have water and fresh air. The Syrian crisis was basically created by global warming. The Middle East is in the worst drought that it's had in the last 500 years. And because of the drought in Syria, all these people were moving in from the countryside, and all this pressure was building in the country because the government wasn't dealing with the water crisis, and it blew up. These sorts of wars and fights are probably going to increase because it's about our relationship to the earth, our relationship to each other, and how do we find a way to work more cooperatively around our common concerns rather than polarize in our fears and divide. Now, I'm not going to pretend to know all the answers to these questions. I don't think any of us can. I do know that it starts with listening. It doesn't, one of the things I know about people and listening, and it's funny that I, as a hearing impaired person, would be talking about listening, but that listening requires patience. It requires staying centered, staying in yourself. It requires not thinking about how you want to respond before you take in what they're saying. You don't have to like what they're saying. Trust me, I've heard a lot of things that I've not liked. But on the other side of it, you can't really move into relationship, and you have to have relationship to change anything. If I push against somebody, if I reject them, they're going to push back. If I tell them that their way of thinking is wrong, they're going to push back. And it's ironic, but it just means that to really bring a spiritual influence, a positive spiritual influence, to bring healing to these divisions, you have to be in relationship. So, from the point of view of my way of being, it means that I ask the Spirit to help me be strong. I fill up in spiritual power. I ask to be strong. I ask for guidance and wisdom to somehow know what to do in an unknowable situation. That's not uniquely shamanic. It is shamanic, but it's not unique so that you couldn't all be doing that in some way. It requires that I ask lots of questions because the spirits want to help us. So they respond to our questions. But the questions will be questions like, how did we get here? How did we get so divided? How do we find our common concerns? How can we move together? In all of the indigenous cultures, because I've traveled the world and I've studied how different cultures make peace, the one thing that I've seen that's truly global among all indigenous cultures is that they work to get people side by side. Because they recognize that if you let conflict go without addressing it, it's going to divide people. And that becomes a sickness. That's a lot of what we have now. We have a lot of unhealed history and a lot of unhealed conflict, and it's coming to bite us. You know, whether it's the history of slavery, history of how we treated Native people in this country, the history people brought from Europe, from Africa, from Asia, from all the different places that people here have come from the South, wherever it might be. All of that's here unhealed. The conflicts are still here. Now, so the first part is you got to get people side by side. And then you got to get them doing things like singing. You know, like singing This Little Light of Mine. That brings people together. They also focus on listening. People will yell and scream within a structured ritual. But you're allowed to yell and scream to get it all out. Because underneath all this polarization is a tremendous amount of pain. And that pain needs to be all out there if we're going to heal it. That's not easy. It's not easy to stay centered and present in the midst of that. But that's how these traditions focus on listening. Now, I will tell you that I personally have a solution for the crisis of America. I do.
Yay! We've been waiting.
I've been waiting. Yeah. Well, it's going to be an unusual one, but this is what I believe it's going to take. I think that we should require a national service for everyone. National service. And that people cannot opt out of national service unless they're totally so disabled they couldn't do anything. And you can't get to pick what national service you get to do because you happen to be connected or rich or whatever. And the reason I'm saying that is because if people have to be side by side, they're going to learn each other. That's how the military helped bridge black and white issues, right? That's how the issue has bridged gay and lesbian issues. They have to be side by side. So I actually think that the only way we're going to heal the polarity in this country is by something like that. Because I don't know if people can sit down and really talk to each other. Even though I think that's part of what we all have to do, getting people to do it is difficult. Now, I've had a lot of students, because I have taught peace studies in different universities, And one of the things that I did was I made my students go to tea party meetings. And one of the things that was really striking to them when they went to tea party meeting was that the rhetoric and language of a tea party meeting was the same rhetoric and language of a progressive Democrat kind of meeting. But the meaning of the words was totally different. So it just means that there should be some way that people could come together around the same rhetoric, but realize that there might be a way of negotiating a different solution. Again, that requires listening. So, I've been blabbing for a while. I'm going to say a few more things, and then we'll have, I think we have a little time for question and answers, is that right? So, it doesn't always make sense how indigenous people around the world listen. It doesn't. And how they know things. Because listening is also about knowing. Maybe in your own life you've had moments where you just knew something. You couldn't explain it, but you knew it. Like you knew something was going to happen. Well, one of my favorite stories of this is a man that I met many years ago from South Africa. He was an anti-apartheid attorney in South Africa before South Africa shifted. He was a white South African. And then when apartheid fell, he was out of work. You know, there's no need for an anti-apartheid attorney if there's no apartheid. So he started doing land rights cases. Because in the old apartheid regime, they had taken traditional land from different tribes and made them parks or whatever they, or developed them or whatever they wanted to do. And the Mandela administration didn't want to do a lot of these kind of cases. They kind of wanted to just get people through the adjustment of trying to heal this history. You know, they started the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. They didn't want to take on more. Well, he took on a case for the Bushmen. You know, the Bushmen are genetically supposed to be one of the oldest groups of the world, and they wanted their land back. And their land was all desert, because when the apartheid government took it over, the water disappeared, everything died, the animals left. And he said to them, "Why do you want this land? It's worthless." And they just said to him, "When we get our land back, everything will return." And he thought, right. But that's what he was doing, you know, he was doing these kind of cases. About 2 years later, he finds out that the courts are going to rule in their favor. So he gets on a little plane, flies out into the bushes on his plane, gets off the plane, stops at this house where one of the elders lived, and he just said, "I'm here to tell you that we're going to win. The courts are going to make a ruling in like 3 months or whatever it was, and the land's going to be returned." And so he's telling this, and the elders, and some others have gathered, and the elder is shaking his head, and there's one cloud in the sky. And they had told him that when the land comes back, it'll start raining. Well, it started raining on him. Him only. Poured. I mean, pouring rain. One cloud. Just pouring rain on where he was standing. He starts crying. And he says, "Is this what you meant?" And they said, no. When we get our land back, it will rain. And everything will come back to life, and the animals will return. So 3 months later, they got their land back. For the next 6 weeks, gentle rain. The grass had started to come back. The water hole started to fill up. The animals came back. Now that's a way of listening and knowing that we don't know anymore. But I will tell you that since this topic is about listening, it doesn't matter whether you're here in Fond du Lac in Europe, in the Middle East, everybody's hearing the same thing. And what they're hearing and the invisible undercurrent is scaring them. And the comfort that we take from being in communities like this is how we'll all get through it. So we have a little time. I can have some dialogue or some questions if people would like.